Guys, welcome back. So on this episode, we are going to rip the front end off the truck and we are going to build a carbon fiber intercooler, I don't know, what do you call it? Charge tube? So it's the intercooler top to throttle body tube. We're gonna make it out of carbon fiber. And the reason the hood is on is because I needed to check some clearances. So we got plenty of room in here, and we're gonna go ahead now and we're gonna work on cutting out our intercooler top that we need to weld on yet. And so we're gonna get the plasma filled up with some water, get that sheet of aluminum mounted up on here, and cut that out. In addition, we're also going to cut out the brake shroud mounts, because if you watched any of the carbon fiber episodes, you know that we made a set of carbon fiber brake ducts, and they need to be mounted on to the spindles. And we're gonna do that with some like little aluminum like brackets. So let's get started. Okay, so if you guys have been following along, you know that the brake ducts we did in a carbon fiber episode, and I only made one of them. Off camera, I did make a second brake duct. This is the second revision of a part that you actually didn't see me cut. You saw me cut that one. It doesn't fit well. So this is what we're gonna do for the brake ducts. The slots on that actually clamp on the brake duct on the carbon are going to be vertical slots, and then where it hooks on the spindle, there are horizontal slots. That way we can get this absolutely perfectly oriented where we need. And then one thing I did want to show is there's a little pad up here that isn't populated yet. We will drill that out after the fact, and we are going to install a temperature sensor, because as I get more familiar with coding and all the electronics projects that I've been working on, I've decided I'm going to build a body control module. And that body control module is going to monitor all of our brake temps, tire temperatures, chassis, roll, yaw, all that fun stuff, as well as all of our suspension travel. So we're gonna build something like that at a later date, but I wanted to put provisions on the brake ducts and get those going. So not what this episode is about, but you saw me cutting the part out, so I wanted to explain what it was for. And if you haven't already watched the carbon fiber episodes, which are separate from this truck series, take a look at it. They are all carbon fiber parts for the truck, but it's a little bit more specific to just carbon building. So check it out. So gonna go out there, start grinding on the intercooler and clean up those parts, and then get them bent up. And I guess we can start welding here in a little bit. Okay, so I have the intercooler out of the truck. Got my part here, and everything's gonna fit up okay. So what I'm gonna do next, I'm gonna prep this intercooler face here, get it cleaned off, all the contaminants out of it, and then let's weld it up. Okay, so we got it all welded up, threw it back up here. You can see we have a decent amount of clearance in the front, and it's a pretty tall hood, which is what I wanted because it's gonna make a straight shot out and into this throttle body. So you can see just about where she's gonna come. So this is gonna extend out, and then this will go up here. I did get a little bit of warp on this flange, so we're gonna have to make sure that that gets straightened back out. But that shouldn't be too big of an issue because we're gonna be bolting a billet, basically a billet sealing flange to that, and that should press that right out. On top of that, we're gonna be running a pretty big, like 1/4 inch O-ring with a fair amount of stick out, so not too concerned about sealing. So that's all well and good. Next up, I think it's time to start 3D printing up some models of what this thing's gonna look like. Okay, so it's the next day. I got this 3D printed out. This is going to be our billet, nice little flange here that's gonna mount on. I didn't put it in yet, but there'll be an O-ring groove here on the back, and that will sit in there. We'll use some O-ring cord stock. Then on this end, we have the throttle body plate with one of those quick disconnect couplings, and that will be that end. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna print out the section that diverges. It's the carbon fiber mold, and it'll diverge into the flange. So it's pretty short, not much material needed, but it should look good. Okay, so I just wanted to show you what I got going on here in Fusion. I got everything modeled up. This will be our billet flange adapter, and then here is our throttle body that you saw all mounted up on there. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this plug, this is gonna be the internal structure, and we're gonna print it out of PLA material. I'm gonna use PLA, if you saw in some of the previous videos, because it has a relatively low glass temperature, so when you heat it up, it forms really easy. And I can take that and sort of pry it out without, you know, damaging the carbon fiber. It's a low enough temperature, it doesn't hurt the epoxy. So I'm gonna take this, export the body that I have in here, and then I'm going to take this body and slice it up in Prusa slicer, and then get to printing. So let's go. Okay guys, so I got it all printed out. I printed in 3 sections. You can see the split line here, and then the tube separated up top there. Right now I have it all epoxied together with some instant epoxy, and I'm letting it, you know, set up overnight. Tomorrow I'm gonna go ahead and put some body filler on this, just a little bit where the seams are, and float it out, make sure it's nice and smooth. Don't have to go too crazy, because remember this is a plug, so it'll be on the inside of the carbon. And I think if that cures up, we can shoot some PVA release agent on this so it doesn't stick to the epoxy, and wrap it in carbon. I think it should go pretty fast from here. So that's what we're gonna do tomorrow. So I'll get spreading on some filler material, and we'll get the PVA sprayed. Okay, so I got this all sanded up. This is pretty much good to go. We don't really need to go any farther than this because it's just an internal plug. I got a new dryer on. This is just a cheap Harbor Freight dryer, so I'm gonna go get my PVA and load the gun up. What I wanted to show you guys is if you have a bunch of these dryers, they're supposed to be one-time use, right? Well, I have a food dehydrator that I don't use for food. I use it for 3D printing filament, drying, reloading brass, you know, that kind of stuff. It's not for food use. These dry out great if you put them in a dehydrator. So what I do is I bought a bunch of them. I just swap them around, dehydrate them after I'm done using them. They, you know, if you see the ones with the desiccant inside, turns perfect blue again, gets all the moisture out. put them in a Ziploc baggie, they're good to go again. So just wanted a quick tip for that. It is helpful. I wouldn't do it if I was spraying like automotive paint. Obviously you want something very consistent and reliable, but you shouldn't really be using these cheap things if you're doing paint anyway. So anyway, let's get set up, spray some PVA. Okay, so we got the PVA sprayed on here and everything's looking pretty good. I got the coating on. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the carbon fiber cut and installed. What we have is some 9.8 inch braid carbon fiber. This is a 12K twill from Solar Composites, and it's a braided material. We got plenty because I only need 2 layers and we got plenty. So on top of that, we have some shrink tubing. So the shrink tubing is a 2-to-1 reduction, and I had to get 2 different sizes because if you look at this, the first section here will be the large size, and then we're going to take some and overlap it down, and then where they meet, we'll just have to make sure we have a nice splice. If we don't get any tight compaction with that, we do have some Dunstone. This is a Dunstone brand shrink tape. I think this is the 120S. And this can wrap around, and then we'll use this for additional tightening on the part. So I'm going to go ahead and get the carbon cut out and the shrink tubing cut out and wrapped over the part and zip tied on. The Solar Composite stuff is really pretty amazing. So you guys saw how I worked that out and started up here with the first layer, zip tied it and pulled it down. And you get a pretty nice finish. Now, one thing I'm gonna have to do is I wet the part out. Some of this is gonna relax a little bit and shift. So I just need to try to keep the twill as straight as I can get it. So I'm trying to work it with my fingers and try to keep the twill straight so it's visually appealing. Overall right now it's relatively good. It actually looks worse on camera than it does in person. It sort of magnifies the shape, but this is a pretty dramatic shape. We're going from a very large bell with basically an equivalent diameter of like 9.6 inches down to a 4-inch tube. So there's a lot of material pulling into this, and it's amazing how well it actually packs up tight. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go down, get the epoxy out. We're going to mix up a batch and then start wetting this part out. Once I wet the part out, I'm going to install the shrink wrap and then get the heat gun and get this thing tightened up. So I probably won't do much more talking here until she's up tight. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that could suck really bad. mainly because what you see here, it sticks to the epoxy, started to tack up and it started to stick to my drop cloth, so it was a mess. The tape, the sleeve rather, was not tight enough to seal tightly around this 4-inch, so I had to go to tape basically all the way down to here, and then this was a sleeve that I wrapped in tape. It looks like a mess right now because I did get pretty good tightness around it, but I had to do it in steps. So there's a good tight compaction up here, a good tight compaction down here, a tight compaction this way, a tight compaction this way, and then all this extra stuff you see everywhere else was basically what you needed to wrap around in order to get a good bite on here and a good bite on here. So this isn't tight, but everything underneath it is. So there's layers. So did the easy stuff first, bridged across to the hard stuff, got the hard stuff tight, and then this leftover stuff here, we don't have to pull tight because the stuff underneath it's already tight. So I think we're gonna be okay. Everything looks, if you actually look at it, where it pulls tight, it looks great. So tomorrow, it's getting late, that's why I'm talking quiet because I don't want to wake everybody up. But tomorrow night, I'll pull this out of the bag, or the wrap, and we'll see how she looks. Okay, it's the next day, about 14 hours later, and surprisingly, this epoxy hardened up super fast. This is the 325 degree Fahrenheit premium resin tech product, rather than the 425 that we used on the valve covers over there. So it's a little bit clearer. It doesn't have a yellow tint to it, which is nice. A little bit more cosmetically pleasing. Not that you can see the yellow tint when it's dry, but you can while you're pouring it. And it really hardens up. It's different. I don't know how to describe it. It's not, the other parts have a little bit more soft touch to it. This is like rock hard real fast. So I'm sure that those will get rock hard as soon as we oven cure them, but this seemed to cure up a little bit harder faster. So I'm gonna go ahead, cut this part, and let's see what we got. Okay, so, well, that ain't it, guys. So what happened here was the multiple layers of shrink wrap doesn't work. So you have a seam in between, and what happens is when you shrink one, it'll push the epoxy out, which it did in this case, and then it gets underneath and in between the layers of shrink wrap. So, I mean, overall the twill turned out half decent, but I did have some issues down here where you can see the shape where it basically scrunched up the end of the twill. So this one is going to be chalked up to trial and error. I do have an idea on how I'm going to do the next one, so I'm gonna get started on that. Basically, we're gonna use one big piece of shrink tubing. I didn't even think about it at the time, but what I can do is I'm going to, rather than taking a smaller piece of shrink tubing and a larger piece of shrink tubing and trying to shrink wrap them together, I'm going to use the large piece of shrink tubing, cut it to the profile of this shape, and then tape the ends, and then use that. So it won't have as much need to compress on the part. So we're gonna try that out and see how that works. I think that's going to be the ticket. But in the meantime, I'm gonna go get printing a new plug and get everything going, because this guy is just a desk ornament. So there you go. Okay, so this is going to be the second attempt. So what I did is I took some Kapton tape and cut the perimeter of the part out. And now you can see that the stretch bag, or shrink bag rather, fits nice and snug to the contour of the part. This is gonna help this region in here that was sort of janky before, where it couldn't tighten up and where the two separate pieces matched up. So this is gonna help that out. On top of that, when we're actually have it in the bag and shrinked, after the heat's on, I'm gonna make a vacuum bag ahead of time and have it ready to go. And I'm just going to stick it in here and put a very light vacuum, not much, probably 10, 15 millibar. And the purpose of that is this large flat portion here doesn't pull down very well. So obviously the shrink wrap pulls tight around the corners and all that. and it'll pull tight here, but that's not putting a lot of downward force because it's pulling in tension this way. So we're going to add a little vacuum pressure, or air pressure on the outside here from the vacuum bag, and push that down, and that should help that whole situation out a lot. So gonna work on getting the plug ready. This seems like a better plan. Okay guys, welcome back. So it's been a little bit for me, not as much for you. We are going to remake that tube like I said. So what I did is I reprinted out the plug inside, and this time I added some end caps. And the reason I added the end caps is because we're gonna do the vacuum bag method that I showed with the, the shrink wrap bag that I showed with the basically tapered sides, but I'm also going to put it inside of a vacuum bag. So if I left this portion open, the vacuum bag would suck in and potentially tear, which isn't good. So I'm gonna go down, get some carbon, start getting everything cut up, get my epoxy mixed up, and we're gonna try to get this thing loaded in here and bagged up. Okay, so that went relatively well. It didn't go perfect because the bag did start to split over here. So that's why you see me wrap the tape over top of it. I think this is gonna be a lot better though, because unlike last time where we had tape right against the epoxy, this time we had a full sheet of shrink wrap. And even though it's split right here, it just split right at that section, I was able to shrink wrap, shrink tape everything. So the shrink tape isn't capturing any epoxy. So we won't have the issue that we had last time where there was big globs of epoxy. So we'll let this cure up, and then we'll rip it out of there and see how it looks. But already it looks a lot better. And the vacuum bag, I could only put a little bit of pressure on it, but it seems like it pulled everything down kind of the way I wanted. And then also what I did is I took a sponge and some blocks here on this one section where it didn't want to pull down, and just sort of stacked up some 1, 2, 3 blocks, and the sponge sort of evens out the pressure. So it's actually hardening up pretty good. So hopefully by tomorrow we can rip it out of the bag.